As expected, President Biden announced a bailout for some student loan debt, a move expected to cost taxpayers in excess of $300 billion. In a White House address this afternoon, the president said American taxpayers will take on the burden of up to $10,000 in student loans and $20,000 for those who received Pell Grants, for those making less than $125,000 a year. Here's what President Biden had to say about the impact of this student loan bailout earlier this afternoon.
All this means people can finally crawl out from under that mountain of debt, to get on top of their rent and their utilities, to finally think about buying a home or starting a family or starting a business. And by the way, when this happens, the whole economy is better off.
Not everyone sees it that way. The president's decision drew fire from Republicans on the Hill, who see it as a transfer of wealth from the poorest Americans to the upper middle class, while doing nothing to rein in skyrocketing college tuition. After all, 87% of Americans do not have student loans. What will all of this mean for the economy? How could it affect the midterm elections? Joining me now to discuss this is Congressman Byron Donalds. He serves on the House Oversight Committee, the House Budget Committee, the Economic Prosperity and Fairness Committee, and he represents Florida's 19th District. Congressman Donalds, good to see you today.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So first, your reaction to President Biden's announcement about what he refers to as student loan forgiveness. Others are calling a bailout.
It's absolutely a bailout. Joe Biden is buying votes for the midterm elections, and it's a sad day for the country because we've never gone through this process of just debt forgiveness writ large. A couple of things. Number one, even Nancy Pelosi said a few months ago that the president does not have the legal authority to do this without Congress. That's number one. Number two, actually, most Americans have either not gone to college at all, or they have made their payments and paid off their student loans. So for the people like myself who paid off their student loans last year, earlier this year, where's my check? Am I going to get my money back? The answer to that is no. And that's why this policy is so reckless. But number three, and most importantly, the president of the United States does not have the legal authority to cancel contracts. And that is exactly what he is doing. He is voiding a repayment contract, and he does not have the ability to do that. Who's going to bear the burden are taxpayers, most of which did not go to college or already have made their payments and repaid their debt. It is the absolute wrong policy. But when you have a president who is struggling in the polls like he is, he's trying to buy votes, and this is the way he's doing it.
Congressman, you note that even Nancy Pelosi said earlier this year that he does not have the legal authority to do this. Who would it be that would step in and challenge the president's legal authority?
Well, actually, where I think this is going to come in is in some of the loan servicers. They're going to make a challenge basically saying that the president's decision is removing income from their firms, revenue from their firms. They would actually have legal standing. I actually think in some respects, Congress has legal standing to raise a challenge because you're talking about a separation of powers issue. But I think because this is so fresh and so new, there's a lot more legal conversations that are going to be had by this. But let's be very clear. There are going to be, in my view, my opinion, legal challenges to this because the president simply does not have this authority. He's just doing it and hoping that the courts don't catch up with him. That's exactly what's happening right now.
And perhaps because everything is happening in a political context heading into the midterm elections, the White House may not even care if they lose a legal challenge as long as they are seen trying to forgive these debts. Is that possibly how they're looking at this?
Oh, no, that's absolutely right. They don't care about the actual legal challenge. What they care about is the politics. So they're perfectly fine with some voters in the country basically being like, oh, my gosh, the Democrats are taking care of me. Let me go be supportive of them. But they simply do not care about the actual legal ramifications about this. They do not care about the debt ramifications of this and what it actually means for the country long term.
Congressman Donald, President Biden, let's assume this is going to actually happen. He expressed today his confidence that this will not have a negative impact on inflation. Here's what he had to say. Let's play. I got a clip I want you to play. Let's play clip 2, and then I'll give you a chance to respond. Sorry about that.
Independent experts agree that these actions taken together will provide real benefits for families without meaningful effect on inflation.
Do you share his confidence?
It's wrong. Number one, the loan, there's been actually a halt on loan payments, student loan payments from the federal government that is still actually going today. So even if you suspend the debt, the actual month-to-month income is already in the hands of these people because they've not actually been forcing people to make their student loan payments. That's number one. Number two, to the independent experts that the Democrats love to cite, actually, who are they and where do they cite it? Because the reality is that these independent experts always agree with radical stimulus policies like this. And number three, and most importantly, when has Joe Biden ever been wrong, folks? He's always wrong, especially when it comes to economics. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know of what he speaks. He's just reading the teleprompter.
Well, another issue, because the concern about the cost of higher education is real, and it's $1.5 trillion in student loan debt that has been taken on. The question of whether it should have been taken on is, of course, a valid one. But sometimes we miss the fact that Harvard, for example, has a $50 billion endowment. Yet they charge, it's well north of $50,000 a year for tuition to go to Harvard. Why is it that the federal government or private lenders are making these loans when these endowments exist? Why should taxpayers be involved at all?
In our country, we made a decision a long time ago that we would make loans available for people to further their education. And as a standalone idea, it sounds great. The problem is that when there's unlimited money going to a specific industry, namely colleges, then the colleges get to raise their prices regardless of the economics on the ground. That's what's actually happened. What we need to do going forward is a couple of things. Number one, we have to stop telling kids that the only way to be successful is to go to college. That is actually not true. It's actually been proven to be very, very false. Number two, if we're going to lend money for college education, then we need to actually lend it on a sliding scale. What do I mean? What I mean is that if you're taking a degree like engineering or accounting, then we'll lend you more money for those fields than if you're going to study art history or humanities. Because the reality is an engineering degree has far more economic viability in our economy than a degree in art history. And so if the two degrees yield different earning ability over the lifetime of the individual, then we should lend differently on those two types of degrees. That's where we should be going with respect to higher education in the United States of America going forward. But we have to stop telling kids you can only go to college to be a success. It is simply not true. There are so many skill sets that can be learned where people can actually make really high wages, have a great life without taking on the burden of college debt.
Yeah, and that point needs to be emphasized in so many ways. We have to rethink higher education. And the ability to be an electrician or be a plumber is going to be economically far better than perhaps a gender studies degree or an art history degree. But Congressman, I want to switch gears with you. Yesterday, you and a group of your colleagues sent a letter to the Department of Defense calling on them to reconsider the vaccine mandate after the Center for Disease Control and Prevention changed their guidelines. Tell us about that.
It's a simple letter, and the letter basically is saying since the CDC has taken a look back and seen that they've been wrong more often than they've been right when it comes to COVID-19, then now's the time to get rid of all these silly vaccine mandates, which were brought to us by Joe Biden and congressional Democrats. Listen, we've lost anywhere from 50 to 70,000 members of our armed forces because of this vaccine mandate, because they just refused to take the jab in their arm. And so Joe Biden said they had to leave the military. That's absurd. We have major issues with the airlines and the air traffic controllers. There are news reports every day now, it seems, about flights being delayed and flights being canceled. One of the big reasons for that is because Joe Biden said that if you're going to fly an airplane or if you're going to be an air traffic controller, you got to be vaccinated. That's also dumb policy. We've lost people in those workforces as well, not to mention what's happened to nurses all across the country. It is terrible policy. We should reverse course because, once again, Joe Biden is wrong. Surprise, surprise.
Do you see the change in CDC guidance as an indication that the federal government broadly is going to change its stance, relax some of these vaccine mandates so that people are no longer losing their jobs and we're not experiencing worker shortages over these vaccines?
It's my hope that that's what actually happens. But I got to tell you, having been in Washington now for 20 months, I don't think that the apparatus, Washington, D.C., or the White House knows how to operate in the real world. They make these decisions for a news cycle and they move on and they forget the ramifications or ignore the ramifications of their decisions. So for the people who've lost their jobs, my heart goes out to you because of this terrible policy brought to us by the Democrat Party. But I don't see them reversing course because they're more concerned about not being wrong or just being obstinate and not reversing course than actually apologizing to the American people and doing the right thing on behalf of the people of the United States.
Congressman Donald, in about 30 seconds, Dr. Fauci announced his resignation. What's your reaction to that?
Dr. Fauci, you will be back on Capitol Hill. Can't wait to hear from you. Just because you resign doesn't mean you don't have to answer questions about the origins of COVID-19 and the gain of function research that you helped fund when you were at the NIH. See you soon.
Well, it does sound like it's going to get interesting. Congressman Byron Donalds, thanks so much for your time today.
Anytime.